Hey, Kevin, I'm awful glad to see you.
Slava Ukraini and God bless America. How are you
Yes,
today?
Geroim Slava. Listen, we love you. We love what you do in Ukraine. I don't know how are your feelings now. Is it harder now? Is it? What do you expect in the next 5 minutes to happen and next 5 years to happen in Ukraine?
For the next 5 minutes, I hear some anti-aircraft fire here in Kiev. So I have no expectations for the next 5 minutes. Overall, things actually are very good. Personally, I am here in Kiev right now. To my surprise, I find
Mhm,
myself working on a couple of research programs, doing what I did before I recently retired to stay here. And
mhm,
it's very satisfying in its own way. And in February, we'll head back to the front.
mhm. So how are things on the front on the Peredok, how this, as they call it in Ukraine?
You know, the energy of our boys is amazing to me. As you know, I'm a combat medic, and one of the things that makes my job harder is that guys will lie and say they're fine when they're not. I'm sorry. Are you going to translate today?
Oh no, I won't be translating. It's in English, but the people can
Okay.
turn on
Good.
the subtitles, and
Okay.
basically I can say, ребята говорят, что они обманывают, они говорят, что им хорошо, на самом деле им плохо. That's
So
normal men's behavior. That
no,
story, no?
it's not in a wartime. Um, and not in the military. And the reason that guys say they're okay when they aren't is because they don't want to get sent back. For us, the biggest punishment is to be sent back. Um,
I mean,
as
away
a
from the action.
Yeah, exactly. And as a medic, when I ask you, does this hurt? I need to know the truth. So it makes my life difficult. Guys hide illnesses, they hide injuries, and the motivation is to stay in the fight.
Yeah. Is there, of course, what's the main shortage, if it can be said, it can be told if it's not the secret. What's the most thing in demand, not speaking of like super weapons or something like that?
So I will anything that's not in the news, I wouldn't talk about. I will tell you what it feels like to have a shortage.
Hmm.
So this past winter, when military aid for Ukraine was held up in combat, I was at the southeastern front. Um, One of the areas where the fighting is still heavy, and in we would hear the artillery barrages coming in on and
Hmm.
on and on. And when an artillery barrage stops, the first thing that happens is your artillery shoots back. And if we had 3 shots back, it was a big day. Most days, 2 shells. Some days, 1 shot fired back. They bombard us. And I knew where the funding for that ammunition was sitting. It was sitting in the US. And what that felt like here is really bad.
Yeah. But I've heard about some plans being developed, constructed maybe in Ukraine for this kind of 122 caliber, right?
This is above my pay grade for sure.
Oh, that's the
You
thing.
literally know more about this than I do.
Yeah, but I read about a little bit. about it, and I understand that the people were scouting around the globe, literally, wherever those shells are left from previous activities, and
Mhm.
Soviet Union, they spread a lot of around a lot of
Mhm.
ammunition of
Yeah,
all kinds, and people were looking for stuff crazy, and
yeah,
that's what most arms dealers do
sure.
when they look for those stored munitions, those schron, as
Mm,
they call it, right? Those places where it's hidden all over the world, and they
mm,
pick it up and they sell it to whomever.
mm.
What do you see any change in Russian military patterns, activities lately,
Uh,
except
to
for
your
what you mentioned, the artillery fire?
to your first point, it's worth keeping in mind that ammunition literally has an expiration date. And for artillery ammunition in particular, there are multiple parts of it. So there's the charge that pushes it through the air. There's a separate charge that ignites the charge that puts it through the air. And then there's the part that blows up when it gets to the bad guys.
Hmm.
All of those can fail. And in addition, modern artillery shells, even like for mortars, um, they have sensors that you can set to when you
Hmm.
want to go off. They're machines. They will break over time.
Hmm.
To your second question, changes in Russian tactics. Um, to me, the most notable thing about Russian tactics at the beginning of the war was their enthusiasm for attacking civilians. And that has not changed at all. I was thinking the other day that most of my people who have died here were in clearly marked ambulances or humanitarian vehicles when it happened.
And it's not by mistake. You cannot, kind of over characterize, so to speak, and putting it
You,
mildly, over characterize this type of behavior.
you're some friends of mine, while they were evacuating to Babushki the other day, um, their vehicle was hit by not one, but two drones. That's two people looking through the visors, right? And
Yeah.
the drones hit right next on the side of the vehicle, right next to the word. I'm making my hands bigger than you can see. It said
Mm-hmm.
volontaire, volontaire,
Mm-hmm.
volunteers in big letters right next to volontaire. Two drone strikes, two human beings looked through their visors and hit right next to the word volunteers.
Yes, that's the way they behave, and they deserve an in-kind answer. But somehow we don't do those things. You don't do those things, right?
No. And let me say something. This is the problem with the Russian military. And often in Ukraine, they're called orcs, like
Orcs.
in The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. And I don't like to use that term because uh, orcs are monsters. Monsters do what monsters do. That's what it means to be a monster. The problem with the Russian military is they're not monsters. They're human beings. They have a heart and they have a head, and they choose to do evil. They choose to do it. That's bad.
Yeah.
And
Listen.
no, you cannot do what they do. If you do what they do, you are no better. I think personally, what's in your heart doesn't matter. What you do matters. That makes you who you are.
Yeah.
They choose to do evil. If we did what they do, I wouldn't be here.
They just reward
That's
evil on
simple.
the highest level in
They they
today's
seem
Russia.
to encourage it. They're into. It's amazing to me the following. With drones, everybody knows where everybody else is. Every shell that they fire at a hospital, every drone that hits a humanitarian vehicle is a shell that they chose not to fire at soldiers. It's a drone that they chose to use on a humanitarian vehicle instead of using it on a tank. Uh, they're humans. They can make choices. They choose to do evil. We don't. That's why I'm here.
Kevin, let me ask you. There's a lot of conversation about the North Koreans being imported into Russia and then moved towards the front. You have any information, any encounters with those imports?
I will say this: if there was ever an escalation, bringing in another country into a war is an escalation. I don't
Yeah.
know what a bigger one is. Uh, we're a very long way from Pyongyang. You know?
Yeah. That's true, but that's the common element of the uh, sorry to say slave culture, over there and in Russia as well. So there people are treated like slaves, and also even the Russian opposition, which is the sad part for me, people who uh, got out of Russia and they have the a little bit, semblance of propaganda, anti-Putin propaganda, new Russia kind of conversation going online. Even
Mhm.
those people, they have this. All those Tajiks, they kind of below us. All those Uzbeks, all those
Mhm.
Central Asians, that's the
Yeah,
it permeates the culture. The culture of mm,
absolutely.
today's Russia is soaked into this idea of little kind of excellence over everybody else. We are, and that's how we fight. That's how we do it. That you may not like it, those hits on ambulances, but we pay any price. We don't. Moral doesn't matter when our homeland is on the line and all this nonsense while stealing the machines, the laundry machines, and the carpets, ripping out the carpets,
Mhm.
carpeting from the homes. Really, people who were serving in the Russian army, they are the highest. Kind of testimony to the level on which people live in Russia. And we hear about prosperity and fat years and the oil and this and that, and everybody's happy, and huge money being made in Russia during those years of the sanctions, so called Biden sanctions. But we see how people act, and that Russia is still like poor and I don't know. I don't want to say uncivilized because that would be again, it's human choice. You choose to be civilized. There are
You're,
a
that
lot
is
of examples of decent people coming and staying in Russia still,
that is the
but
problem. They are civilized. They know better. They make a choice to do evil. And I will say, you talk about the contrast between this Russian narrative about prosperity and growth versus the truth, and which is, you know, there's soldiers
mm,
stealing things like common thieves because they're not prosperous. There's nothing new about this lie, about this narrative, this untruth. How far back was it the official Soviet policy to paint this picture that their system was better than our system? The evidence being material prosperity of their citizens. And many of your listeners lived through those lies. And know firsthand the extent of the untruth and the extent of the hypocrisy of the Communist Party, which did not even hide the special stores and all the stuff that the party members had access
Yeah.
to. No one else did. Um, the the thievery is one of the things that baffles me as a soldier. Um, Let me tell you two stories. Um, One of my pobratimi,
Hmm.
a doctor I worked with, he is from Bucha, and they have in his neighborhood, after the Russians were driven back, they had a telegram channel where people would post things that they found in his neighborhood. The reason is that the Russian troops on their way out had looted another neighborhood. As you said, everything from washing machines to carpeting. They came through his neighborhood. His neighborhood was a better neighborhood. So they threw out the stuff from the less good neighborhood, dumped it in the streets, and replaced it with the stuff they stole from the better neighborhood. Um, that back.
Meanwhile, killing people who would stand in their way of stealing
Oh,
it.
absolutely. Meanwhile, I worked in an area where there was an old abandoned store that we used as a morgue. It was winter time. That's where we kept
Yeah.
the bodies of the dead guys. And in this abandoned store, there were still shelves on the wall. And on the wall, there were still cans and jars, homemade vegetables and the stuff you see in those
Yeah.
little stores in the Ukrainian countryside. We would go in, look at them, talk about them, and walk back out again. We weren't going to take this abandoned stuff. It belonged to another human. We're not going to take that. We'll get our food the right way.
Yeah.
Uh, so you
Listen,
see why I
those
understand.
stories are so obvious to us, and we know it. They ring true, and they are true. And for Americans, it's hard to kind of comprehend and wrap their minds around it because of this war is absolutely unnecessary, uncalled for, unprecedented. I mean, precedented, of course, but it's so kind of such a burst, such an explosion of madness, of like people like to call it medieval, but I have more respect for Middle Ages. Seriously, and it got a bad rap. Middle Ages got a bad rap. But it's just so kind of unexpected because Russia, you say Russian in the middle of New York, and if you're far enough from Brighton Beach, people say, "Oh, I've been to Carnegie Hall lately. There was a wonderful cellist playing there, or there was a soprano in a metropolitan opera." And there was a show of Russian artists and this and that. And I went to, it had some blintzes, etc. on Brighton Beach, like once in a blue moon. It's a ritual for a New Yorker, for a true New Yorker, to go have some Russian food. But it's just something that was not expected from all we knew about Russia in last, I don't know, 20 years. I mean, speaking from the position of New Yorker, of course, we here in what's called Southern Brooklyn, we knew what we got away from, and it's such a return of this cruelty that was so unexplained to us when we read about the Gulag, the Solzhenitsyn Gulag Archipelago, and stuff like that. So we heard about it, heard about the 30s, 1930s, 1940s,
Mhm.
1950s, 1920s. It's a long trail of blood. coming with this thought of how Russian history in the 20th century, a major contribution to making 20th century the bloodiest century in the history of the world, basically.
I picked up the Gulag Archipelago the other day. I had to put it down. It was too depressing.
Yeah,
Let's keep in mind.
it's kind of why it was written.
Yeah.
That was the idea. And
Mm.
there are even more depressing books on the subjects written by people who were like fully. Uh, mm, of course, Solzhenitsyn went through his share of all those things, and also I'm talking about Varlam Shalamov's stories. Also, another prisoner. People were kind of. I just my most hated part to read about that. I mean, not to think about that. That's most painful part, and the people of arts who were most ardent Bolsheviks, like Vsevolod Mirhold, and poets like Osip, not so much Osip Mandelstam, but a lot of them had those um, ideations rather about Bolshevism and communism, and they were most mercilessly tortured and killed for the shows they produced, on the plays they wrote, for the poems they wrote. They were like mixed. I mean, messed up seriously before they put a bullet through their heads, and that's like, why, what for? This is just, I never understand. I'll never understand it. And of course, this program should be probably, I mean, friends, друзья, вы можете включить субтитры, если вы хотите по-русски. Это не сработает сразу. Требуется некоторое время, чтобы Google обработал то, что мы говорим здесь, и позволил это все читать по-русски. Но очень важно, чтобы это все прозвучало по-английски, потому что именно среди американской аудитории есть разночтение по поводу того, что происходит в Украине, и превалирующий тон категорически меня не устраивает. Я хочу слышать прямую речь от прямых людей прямо оттуда, где это все происходит. И мы этого как раз очень не хватает. Нам сегодня этого не хватает, даже после того, как победил наш Гай, наш человек. Наш победил на выборах, и нам все равно не хватает той правды, которую мы хотим слышать, и которая там. Она там есть, мы знаем об этом, и больше людей об этом будет знать, поэтому по-английски все-таки мы это делаем.
І теж, друзі, після війни я буду вивчати російську мову. Ще рано, сьогодні ще рано, але я буду.
In Ukrainian, it's also important because, because of...
Так. Я вивчаю українську мову через, майже 3 роки. Але, у нас тут є 2 мови. 2 мови. It's, Putin's primary characteristic to me is to lie. And one of his biggest, most wrong lies, I think, is that he is here to save Russian speakers. Most of his violence has been focused on primarily Russian-speaking parts of this country. When I go through a destroyed house, I look for the bookcases. And over, I find bookcases full of Russian language books. That's what he's destroying. Meanwhile, as soon as he rolled across the border on February 24th, tens of thousands of Russian-speaking Ukrainians ran and joined the army. When I went to Polyhon, when I went to boot camp, everybody spoke Russian. One kid, he didn't recognize Ukrainian when he heard it spoken. He asked what language he was, but he carried a rifle right next to me to defend this country against Russia.
It's a messy situation, and I don't think people around you are really are. I don't want to kind of ignite this attitude, but negotiation is negotiation. How necessary is the peace now in Ukraine on the conditions that are close to what you have today?
Um, the peace that Putin is
Armistice.
offering us, the peace that Putin is offering us is not peace. It's worse than the conditions today. And I will say this, as bad as what he's offering us is, he will still violate that agreement.
Sure.
Here's why I say that. I can't see the future, right? I
No.
can see his past activities. I can see Russia's past activities. I can see that since the 1700s, Russia has made and broken at least 16 peace agreements, ceasefires, um, truces, declared ends of war. I'm not going to talk about those. I wrote some down today. Putin, I counted today 8 times that he has signed a peace agreement and broken it. Let me point out that the first Minsk agreement was signed in September of 2014, months after he first took Crimea and parts of Luhansk and Donetsk. Very quickly signed a peace agreement. Between them then and the full-scale invasion, 8,500 Ukrainians died in the fighting that he never stopped. Almost 4,000 of those people were civilians. He
Yeah.
slaughters specifically Russian-speaking Ukrainians.
No, he's all kind of what he explains to himself. I think I could, so I did it. So that's it.
There's two parts to this. One is he's a murderer. Striking civilian targets, that's not war, that's terrorism. The other is he's a liar. Now, how do you make a deal with a liar? Part of making a deal is two people speaking to each other in good faith. That means if I say I'll do something, you should assume that I will do it. If Putin says something, it's much safer to assume that he won't do it. How do you negotiate with that? I don't know of a way to negotiate with a liar personally.
In seeing the reserve of kind of negativity and poverty that they have in Russia, there's some riches and there's some huge level of poverty widespread, and they have high tolerance to poverty. So there is no leverage over him now. There's no incentive rather for him to you know do anything towards this war, because it's good for him. He's ready to sacrifice his own people. He's more than ready to kill more Ukrainians, either Russian speakers or no Russian speakers, Ukrainian speakers, whoever. And he's absolutely cannot be kind of he nothing to dangle in front of him. Seriously, sanctions, the exchange of the trade between Russia and the United States, say, or the rest of the world is kind of negligible. Rest of the like so-called first world, and they are content with dealing with India, huge country, China, huge country. There's enough money for them to spread between the oligarch, etc. So that's no incentive for him to change the situation. He has to feel the pain somehow, and where this pain lies, I don't know. Energy, he's comfortable selling whatever he has. Some say that he got richer. Russia got richer, not richer, but they made more money in the last couple of years than they ever made, because they sell much more, and I think it's outside of the OPEC regulations, whatever, to China. I cannot prove or disprove it, but there's much less control in all those deals that he's having today. So how to make him kind of try and I mean, my plan from the beginning, I know it's anecdotal, and it's half jokingly I said that we need like 5,000 honest people from around the world, or 50,000 honest people around the world, to descend on wherever he is right now. All those people get paid like $5 million each, and they capture the scumbag and whoever is around him, and they take him to, say, Club Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay, any nice resort that, or some black site, wherever, where they can torture people. They say some they entrust it to some
No,
Romanians.
no. Let him live a long life in prison. Let him live a long life in a cell 2 meters by 2 meters, and think about what he did.
Until he's there, and a lot of people agree with that, until Putin is in Russia, and until he's protected by those people who have who can inflict violence on to those who make him rich, like so-called oligarchs, then he will stay there, and double or no double, the Putin double this whole meme about him having like seven
Right.
doubles. Yeah. The story will continue in the same bloody way it goes on now.
Well, I think that you touch on a way that this war can end. It's tied up with the economy. Where does Russian money come from? So, as you know, Russia does not make things as much as it takes them out of the ground. Russia doesn't have a big production for export economy. Most of what it did export, they can't anymore because of sanctions. So basically, the war effort, as I understand it, is what's keeping the Russian economy functioning right now. And it's keeping a lot of people in jobs right now. And it's paying these huge sign up bonuses that they paid to soldiers. And as a soldier, to me, nothing worse than killing, nothing worse than killing for money. So the war manufacturing economy requires that you have plants, big missile strikes against plants, building,
Yeah.
making ammunition, building tanks. Pretty good way to end the war. When you have a bunch of people who used to be employed, who aren't employed anymore, and a lot of them know how to use guns, your government is probably going to fall. And Putin falling, to me, as a guy in the trenches, not speaking for my unit, I don't see another way that this ends.
I would think, there was a conversation when there was this order of lend lease kind of 2.0, signed by Joe Biden in 2023, I believe, right? It was that thing that to send the equipment that is supposed to be destroyed by the regulations, due to the regulations in the military. You have to kind of melt certain number of things made of metal, because they wouldn't be as dependent, and you have to destroy artillery shells and vehicles, etc., etc., etc. So the idea was to send those things in Ukraine and be destroyed there in action, so to speak, just to be used for one last time, according to their kind of the designation
Mhm.
is why they were created. So the sign of this thing actually happening would be a great signal to Putin where this war would go if those shells that are so lacking in the military right now would be sent from the states. And there is I don't kind of take seriously conversation that we're out of artillery shells. It's a lot of time. We see how things move when government wants to how fast it moves.
Oh,
When
so
government
this
wants
is
to
a
do
big.
it.
Let me jump in here, Yura,
Yeah,
if you
sure.
don't mind.
U.S.
So
government, I mean.
one of the big lessons of this war has been how much artillery shells you go through. For context, we just spent 20 years fighting a counterinsurgency. Part of what makes a counterinsurgency, part of what makes an
Hmm.
insurgency is you don't have the big guns. You don't have tanks, you don't have artillery, you don't have planes. And for many decades, our American manufacturers of ammunition, like of everything else, have followed a business philosophy called just in time manufacturing. It's good for the manufacturer because you don't have unsold stock. You
Yeah.
don't have to have big warehouses. It falls completely to pieces if you suddenly need a lot of something. And uh, we did not need very many artillery shells. We
Yeah.
didn't need a lot of tanks for a long time. We were
Because the
fighting.
future is in space, it's in the cyberspace, it's
Well,
anywhere
we've
but.
been fighting wars for a long time. We had plenty of experience
Yeah.
fighting guys who didn't have anything bigger than a 60 millimeter mortar. One of the lessons of this war for America, for NATO, for everybody is that fighting a war against what we call a near peer adversary, army against army, it requires far more shells than anybody thought at this point would be necessary. So yeah, there's some
Mm.
catching up to do. And bear in mind, as I said, ammunition has an expiration date.
Yeah.
Um, I have here some nasty, dirty old tape.
Hmm.
It was a very well-meaning donation, and certainly I use it to tape stuff together. But as I said, it's nasty, and I don't want to put it on my boys. Um, Getting old stuff doesn't it solves as many problems as you could solve with old stuff. It's not the same as
Listen, what
dry
brought you
powder
my.
and so on.
I
And I'm
know.
grateful for it. As you will see, I did not throw out this tape, right? I've got
No,
it
of course.
with
Yeah.
all of my other scraps of tape.
Yeah,
And
who
I
knows where you
will
need
use
this
it.
tape
Happy to
next.
have
I must tell you that I had a car accident in Europe a few years ago,
it. Oh no.
and yeah, there was nothing, we were not harmed, uh,
Hmm.
basically. But I came out of the car, and some passersby they stopped, and I had a piece of plastic in my this part of my
Hmm.
hand from the exploding the airbags,
Yeah.
and the covering this piece of
Hmm.
it is stuck into it here, and they
Hmm.
eventually they put stitches, etc.
Wow.
So no, why I'm saying it, because one of the guys who stopped by, a young man, he was running to me. He saw me holding my hands and blood coming out of here, and he was bringing me a dirty sock
Hmm.
as a way to kind of put around it and
Hmm.
stop the bleeding. And it was
Hmm.
clearly, I saw it from half a mile
Hmm.
as he was running.
Hmm.
It was dirty sock. So
Hmm.
he insisted to wrap it around my hand. So I'm
Hmm.
saying it was not even in the battlefield.
Hmm.
That's in defense of those who said
His
the
heart was in the right place.
yeah,
I would love to know that guy. This is the guy you
yeah,
want to be your neighbor, right?
that's right.
Not a guy who has new socks and keeps them for himself. You want the guy
Yeah,
who only has a dirty sock, but he'll share it with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
summertime. There was not so clearing time.
Yeah.
So listen, this is a taste of reality. That you give to us is absolutely priceless, and I understand it's not the same as being there while we are here commiserating and feeling the passionately about what's going on. And I want to offer. Correct me if I'm wrong. I was giving this phone number for Zelle donations.
Yes. And please, 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 if you send a donation, include a message that says how I can contact you to
Yeah.
say thank you. 3 people recently included their phone number. I think they thought I was crazy because I was so happy to be able to call them and say, thank you. I cannot tell you the difference between a donation and a donation where you know there's a human being behind that. We're afraid of one thing here, and that is being forgotten. And knowing there's a person, not just a government, not just a company, but a person behind that donation, that's what keeps me going here. Can I
There's
add
also an email that I have. Is this correct
yes,
one?
this works for PayPal,
Uh
and
huh.
it also works totally fine. And again, please include a message so I know how I can thank you. Um, uh, can we conclude with some good news?
Let's
I have
do
plenty
it.
of. So you ask what it's like at the front. One of the things that I do to answer questions like, how do people feel in Ukraine? Is everywhere I go, I look at graffiti. I watch graffiti very carefully to see what they're saying. And what I see is things like Putin хуйло,
Hmm.
за Україну до кінця. Now, here's the thing. It doesn't surprise me in Kiev. The amazing thing to me is to see it at the front. And the most amazing thing to me is to be in an area where the Russians are coming and see this kind of graffiti. I will never forget in Bakhmut, very soon before it fell, um, somebody had spray painted Donetsk, Ukraine, in Ukrainian. Uh, if the bad guys are coming and you're writing graffiti for your side, that's a big, big deal. That says something about what's happening in here.
Yeah.
The right before I left the front, what I was seeing was Putin хуйло.
Hmm.
That takes some courage to do that if the bad guys might be rolling across your front lawn the next day.
Yeah.
And
I only want to add to this that people who are actually fighting the war, they are on at least the third place in what the world news and the US news are talking about. First is Putin, second is Zelensky, and I'm
Mhm,
talking like the collective Putin,
mhm,
collective Zelensky. And
mhm,
only if on a good day they mention the actual fighters, and
mhm,
they don't hear a lot of people from a lot of people who are fighting the front line on the front lines,
mhm,
and they settle on the shots that were like archive shots, stock shots.
mhm.
Basically, there is
Yeah.
no attention to people who are big part, an active part. They actually those 300 Spartans who are defending this
Mhm.
the Ukraine. That
Well, there's a reason for that, at least for the big foreign companies, and it's called insurance. So if you work for NBC, ABC, Fox News, your insurance company does not want you to get too close to the front line. And the
no, I'm talking about a
journalists are,
conversation like ours. They could have called you.
this
They
is
could
why
have
I'm
asked
on
you the
your,
same way
this is
I
why
asked.
I'm so happy to come on your show, Europe, because you bring in those other angles. And let me tell you, from my perspective as a fighter, the stories that I want to be told are of the grandmothers and the grandfathers. We like to talk about how Ukrainians are all kozaki, we're all heroes, we're all strong. The truth is, Ukrainians are people like anyone else. And over and over and over in these villages, I see people who could be my grandmother, my grandfather, God help me, my son, and that is who Putin is attacking. That's whose schools he destroys. That's whose home he destroys. That's who he kills. And we must not forget that, Yura. We must not forget that.
Kevin, thank you so very much for finding time, and we should continue. We must continue doing what we're doing, and this will end well, and this will end with a victory for people of goodwill.
I believe that to be the case. I was a scientist. I try not to believe things. I try to know things and to know what I don't know. But I choose to believe good triumphs in the
Certain
end.
things you cannot know, and
There's a lot of historical evidence supporting my belief that good triumphs in the end.
Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava, God bless America. Thank you, and thank you to all of your listeners for listening and for keeping in your mind what's happening here. Bye-bye.
Спасибо, друзья.